Welcome to podcast 2A, Protestantism and the Pilgrims and Puritans of New England. I'm Dr. P. By the end of this podcast, you should be able to define the Protestant Reformation and describe how it affected colonial U.S. history, describe the Puritan and separatist sects of Protestantism, and explain why Puritans and separatists, who were also called Pilgrims, migrated to New England during the first half of the 17th century. You should take notes during this podcast, pause it as necessary, and listen to it as many times as you need to in order to be able to answer these learning objectives by the end of the podcast. In 1517, a Roman Catholic monk from Germany named Martin Luther tried to reform the Catholic Church. Luther and his followers thought the Catholic Church gave too much power to priests, who then abused this power. Because Luther protested against these abuses, the movement he started became known as the Protestant Reformation. Before Martin Luther's revolution, all Western European Christians were Catholic. After his revolution, however, Western European Christians were either Catholic or Protestant. Eventually, new Protestant sects or denominations were formed, and all of them broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. While the Catholic Church itself remained under the control of the Pope in Rome, the new Protestant denominations, such as Lutheranism, Methodism, Baptist, all differed and were under more local, decentralized authorities. One of Luther's key ideas was that individual people could establish their own personal relationship with God primarily by reading the Bible and not relying on a priest to interpret it for them as Catholics did. This emphasis on individualism prompted several throughout Northern and Central Europe to form their own churches. One of these individuals was King Henry VIII of England. Henry desired a male heir, but his current wife was not conceiving any boys. Though he wanted to marry someone else to improve his chances of fathering a son, divorce is considered a sin in the Catholic Church. Therefore, Henry founded his own church called the Church of England, placed himself at its head, and granted himself a divorce. Followers of the Church of England are called Anglicans in England, and their adherents in North America later became known as Episcopalians. This is the religion of the people who later founded Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, and who you'll learn more about in podcast 4. Unfortunately, Henry's religious conversion set off decades of religious animosity between those who remained Catholic in England and others who converted to Anglicanism. Still others maintained that Anglicanism did not go far enough in ridding itself of the excesses and corruption of Catholicism. These people said that they wanted to purify the Church of England and so were called Puritans. Others still felt that the Church of England was beyond purification, so they sought to separate from it. These folks were thus called separatists. First, they separated from their old homes in England to establish a small community in the town of Scrooby, noted here by the red square. But when local inhabitants began to persecute them, the separatists eventually relocated to religiously tolerant Holland or the Netherlands. However, when their children began to adopt Dutch customs, these Englishmen sought a new location where they could worship God as they pleased and bring up their children as Englishmen. Eventually, they settled on the New World. These religiously motivated journeys earned them the title of Pilgrims, the name for anyone who makes a trip in the name of religion. Our pilgrims sailed on board the ship Mayflower and arrived in the place they called Plymouth after the town where they had originally lived in England in November 1670. Eventually, the Pilgrims were absorbed into the much larger community of Puritans who settled Boston in 1630. The colony they established was known as Massachusetts Bay Colony in the heart of the region they would call New England. Together, the Pilgrims and Puritans who migrated to New England between 1620 and 1640 comprised the core group of settlers from which most New Englanders up through the Revolution descended. In the next podcast, we'll learn more about New England itself and how the Puritans' religious beliefs helped them to thrive there. Before doing so, however, take a moment to review the learning objectives for this podcast. Write each one out in a sentence or short paragraph now. If you can't do so, go back and listen to this podcast as many times as you need to, pausing as necessary to take notes until you can answer each objective in writing. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next podcast.